It was a day like many others in Piedmont, the region of the northern Italy where I live, and as usual I was wandering around when suddenly I found myself asking, what is beyond the mountains? Well, of course France, but what kind of France? What is the taste of those places? I never been there, I wanted to discover it, and I mean not only with a cold Google search, no, what the hell, I want to see it with my own eyes, so it was time to road trip. And here I was, again submerged by suitcases, ready to jump on my spaceship in search of new experiences. Hi, I'm Lawrence and I'm here to tell you many adventures around the world from my human point of view. Before starting our journey, why not join our community, take a big like and subscribe so I'll be able to tell you even better stories. By the way, let's jump into the adventure. This time I decided it was time to go back to my beloved France. In particular, I realized that a super interesting city was missing from my bucket list. I'm talking about Lyon. Then, since I decided to go by car, why not take the opportunity to discover its surroundings a bit? I heard about many very picturesque villages on its wine-growing hills, with castles, vineyards, and places typical of the local tourism. I couldn't wait any longer, so burned by the hype with my curiosity coming out of every thought, like dense spirals of rainbow light, I took off, whizzing at top speed on the highway. Since I wanted to fill this trip with spectacular views, I decided to avoid the boring Frasia's tunnel to take the opportunity to opt for a more panoramic and interesting solution, and so on. Here I am. Raga, oggi sono solo di passaggio, però qua ci ritorno perché è veramente bellissimo questo posto. The Mountainese Pass offers some really beautiful tracks, some of which are within everyone's reach. Unfortunately, I was traveling and didn't have much time for nature walks. Despite all, this first break before reaching France had put me in a really good mood. What could be better than lake of a beautiful glacial blue to start a mini adventure journey? Therefore, watching the changes in the environment around me, I continued on my way, first crossing the Maurienne Valley, then gliding carelessly on the Savoy and Isère highways to finally reach my daily destination, my base for this journey. E sono arrivato all'hotel, guardate che figa che è questa stanza, yes, con anche il parquet e soprattutto qua c'è il bagno, che come al solito ha una doccia super figa e uno specchio dove ci sono anch'io. Ciao a tutti. E adesso, guys, mangio qualcosa e noi ci vediamo domani per l'esplorazione vera e propria di Lyon. Yes! Ed eccomi guys, si va verso Lione centro. Tra l'altro pensavo facesse molto più freddo perché ho visto tutti intabarrati dentro a far colazione e niente, invece si sta bene in maniche corte e ci siamo. Let's go! And so my day began. I jumped in my car, headed straight downtown, and after finding a very claustrophobic parking lot, I was ready. E ragazzi, ci siamo, benvenuti a Lione. I was in the La Part-Dieu area, a rather modern and central neighborhood and fundamental hub of European transports. But I wasn't there for the modernity. The idea was to try to perceive the real flavor of the city and where to start, if not from the heart, from the central peninsula where the historic Presqu'île district rises, surrounded by the Seine and the Rhone rivers. So I crossed the Wilson Bridge. Guys, sono arrivato in Place Bellecoeur, che guardate è veramente gigantesca, sconfinata direi. Guardate che roba, è gigante questa piazza e c'è un cavallo al centro, vedete qua, non so se lo vedete, lì c'è un cavallo sì. I arrived across Rue de la République at the beautiful Place Bellecoeur, and I started wandering happily around this huge square in the center of Lyon. Here you can also see a statue dedicated to the Little Prince, who unfortunately I missed, but which I advise you to see, and of course the famous statue of Louis XIV in the middle of the square. The feeling I had was of walking in an infinite, almost empty place. I visited in the past other really big squares, for instance in Padua, but I don't know. There was that skimpy statue in the center and it looks so disproportionate compared to the size of the horse. But there was one thing that caught my eye. Those murals, they were drawn on the roofs. They are everywhere around the city. But with this long chimney they gave an almost cartoonish mood to this square. I certainly wouldn't have been surprised to see Tintin come out of a small tree. I know it's a Belgian series, but I don't know, I got that feeling. My downtown tour had just begun with an awe-inspiring vastness. Next stop, Place des Jacobins, where I admire the UNESCO fountain. By dint of slowing down the water, my heart was once again aligned with the world. I was heading north, where the impressive opera house was waiting for me. Passing in front of the Palais de la Bourse, I reached it in 20 minutes and it was special. Right there I met one of the people I will remember forever. Comunque raga, i lionesi sono veramente troppo simpatici. Ho fatto amicizia con un signore con una barba bianca e due trecce lunghissime, super simpatico, che aveva discendenze italiane, quindi parlava italiano di Viareggio, però era argentino e parlava anche francese, parla 200.000 lingue. Simpaticissimo, che mi ha spiegato la storia del teatro dell'opera che è qua alle mie spalle, veramente top. E poi ho fatto amicizia con una ragazza che si è fermata di fianco a me, vicino a me, che si è messo a piovere, infatti vedete tutto bagnato per terra, e è stata una bellissima esperienza, devo dire. Che persone simpatiche che parlano, che fanno amicizia. Top, raga, top. Yes, this nice person told me many amazing stories about Opera House, starting with first old theater destroyed by a fire and then telling me about when it was rebuilt with this neoclassical facade. But the funniest moment was having a chitty chat with this guy. Always lived in France, very smart and with a great desire to joke. And you know what? Humans should be always like him, definitely. Le Grand Île was well explored, but before moving to the next place I only missed one important square, Place des Terreaux. Place de Terreau was my favorite square of Lyon, especially for this statue made by the precious hands of Mr. Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, the famous designer of the Eiffel Tower that we already met in Colmar. By the way, all the square is really wonderful, keeping in mind the town hall, the Hotel de Ville and the Museum of Fine Arts. It's certainly not to be missed on a good Lyonese itinerary. The day started in a great way, but let's move on. Ragazzi, prossima tappa, la Vecchia Lione. I was on the Feuillet Bridge and I was crossing the Saône River. In front of me one of my favorite areas of the city, Le Vieux-Lyon. I'm talking about the Renaissance district of the city. Here many narrow streets with many small and artisan shops do not make me feel inside of a big city, but like wandering through the beautiful streets of a village. I got a weird feeling like something I've seen before, and my beloved Matilde and her delicious chocolate had nothing to do with it. Questa Vecchia Lione mi ricorda un po' una Gamla-Stan francese, devo dire la verità. Però figo, è super tipica, dovete venire qua raga. Bellissimo. Yes, especially the shape of the houses, so straight and high, drew my thought to my lost Stockholm. But the environment makes me feel very different moods. I don't know, I try to explain designing a character. Let's talk about a very charming and elegant street artist with a hole in the cylinder, and as you talk to him a little deeper, you can discover his weird and happy thoughts. He can surprise you and make you laugh. A bit like some kind of Archibald from the Mirror Visitor Quarter Cycle, a fantasy novel. A mood very different from Gamla-Stan, more Nordic and elegant in some kind of modern style. I don't know. Following my narrow way, I discovered the Saint Jean Gothic Cathedral. It was built in medieval time and is very massive building. I was particularly surprised by its windows, its astronomical clock and its majestic and obviously Gothic elegance. Pareva, no? Che non facessi un'altra salita da morire. Però lo sappiamo, che poi si arriva sopra e c'è il panorama pazzesco, vedete? Beccatela lì la salitazza. Sweating like a pro tracker, I walked uphill looking for a good landscape, as I always do in my travel. My goal was, after leaving Old Lyon, to reach one of the most impressive churches in the city, the Basilica of Notre Dame de Fourvière. While I went up, I took the opportunity to look around. The heat and thirst were killing me, and as I wandered around in my world, I found this very upset face inviting me to rest for a couple of minutes. But I didn't have so much time. Following my path, I found an ancient Roman theater built by the Emperor Augustus. Here in Roman time, many kinds of entertainment come to life. Gladiators, wild beasts, mime, poetic representation, and after being renovating it is still used for dance performances, opera music and other cultural entertainment. There was an amazing view. For a moment I thought about sitting behind a tree in contemplation, but I had a mission. Ragazzi, c'è una luce pazzesca, però ho trovato la basilica. Adesso ve la faccio vedere. Mi sono nascosto qua in un anfratto per evitare il vento. Tra l'altro ho bisogno di una bottiglietta d'acqua. Io spero che ci sia qualcuno qua che le vende. So, okay, I found the basilica, but I lost all the water in my body. I was falling on the floor dry and sandy when I found a little bar near the church where I bought half a liter of water for €4.50. Yes, €4.50. What the hell? I was crying like a Scrooge McDuck when I realized that each drop cost about 20 cents. But what I have to do? So I recovered and I started looking around. This basilica is also called the upside-down elephant due to the shape of these four towers, very similar to the paws of this large mammal. From its hill it ruled the city with grandeur. It was built in honor of the Virgin Mary, to whom salvation of the bubonic plague was attributed. Built over the hills, dominant up there as a sign of victory of Christian values over socialist ones, and in atonement for the sins of modern France. I am really far from this kind of thinking, but it's really a beautiful structure. The most surprising thing is that it was built with two different artistic styles, Neo-Byzantine and Neo-Romanesque. Ed ora si scende! There was one last cool place I'd like to visit in Lyon, and it's located in the Croix-Rouge, a much more popular and very characteristic area. We are talking about a high hill of the city with a troubled history of urban development. Famous above all for the silk processing industry, it was a working-class neighborhood with high population density. Walking through those streets, I felt like I was in a place of exchange. I couldn't stop imagining those streets at the beginning of the 19th century, with a few workers walking around the streets and a newspaper boy darting around by bicycle. But the most interesting thing of Croix-Rouge is this fresco, the Wall of the Lions of Mur de Canu, which tell the life stories of the people of the city. I like it so much, and I stopped there for half an hour to study all the details. There were parrots, windows, strange characters, and many stories to imagine. Raga, che figata, ma cosa aspettiamo anche noi a dipingere i muri? Tanta roba, cioè, sarebbe fighissimo se fosse tutto dipinto, tutto con un sacco di disegni. Top! That day I hadn't walked enough, so I decided to take advantage of the last hour of light to wander around the Golden Head Park of Lyon. After all the time spent in downtown, it may seem strange, but I really needed a moment in nature. As soon as I entered, I started taking pictures and clips as much as possible, walking through the park's avenue and approaching its pond, when suddenly... Okay, no, hold on, stop, there's something wrong here. That was a giraffe. What was doing there? I thought they lived much farther south. For a minute I blamed the climate change, then I thought I filmed too much that day, but the moment I started to think I was crazy, I saw a crocodile. Okay, maybe it wasn't me. I could imagine everything, but come on, it's impossible to conceptualize a crocodile in Lyon. Not without sunglasses. Doing a quick search, I discovered that inside the park there was a small zoo with animals of all kinds. So I spent the time that remained shooting like never before, and then being kicked out because otherwise I would have stayed there all the night. Well, the day was over then. Secondo giorno di viaggio, my friends, e oggi vi porto un po' qua nei dintorni ad esplorare un pochettino la zona. Siamo pronti. I was ready and hopping in the car with a new purpose, to wander around to discover some picturesque villages around Lyon where French people like to escape during their free time. So after a half-hour drive I reached my first destination. Guys, sono arrivato a Villefranche e adesso andiamo a cercare il centro, che deve essere di qua. I was in Villefranche-sur-Saône, a small village of 35,000 inhabitants scattered in the hills of Beaujolais. It was built all around the main street, and my first impression was that some time ago was a resting place for people who planned to travel on this road. As far as I'm concerned, I was walking on the Rue Nationale observing the typical houses and the little modern and full of Frenchness shops. The coolest thing that catch my eye is that since it wasn't completely flat but a little concave, I was able to admire good part of the street while also taking good shots. Comunque raga, è veramente incredibile quanto siano simpatiche le persone di questo posto. In Villefranche I met some really nice people, in particular these two guys who stopped me while they were having breakfast and asked me why I was visiting this village of Beaujolais. They were very curious and told me about their trip to Italy, and one of them also spoke Italian, that is my native language. It was great. They also subscribed to my channel. Yes, thank you very much guys, you are great. If you are planning to come to visit, you have to know that this small city has a little gem, a 20th century Gothic church called Notre Dame des Marais. A famous legend tells that some shepherds found a statuette of Mary in a nearby swamp and took it to the Madeleine Chapel, but the next day it disappeared again, and after a long search they found it in the marshes exactly here, where this church then was built. But now comes the funny part, yes, let's do it. When I arrived, a wedding will soon take place. Yes, they were all elegant except myself. Oh, okay, that's fine, no problem. So I took a little break to observe. Do you know that in France bride and groom go to the altar together? I didn't know it, that's very interesting. By the way, I didn't feel so comfortable, so I set out again. I was strolling around the Beaujolais, and I think I would felt like a hen if I didn't visit the beautiful village of Orange. As you know, this region is famous above all for winemaking, so obviously I got lost in the vineyards, of course. Dove mi sta facendo passare? Ma dove mi stai facendo passare? Ma che cazzo? Ma dove sono? Ma dove sono finito? Ma proprio perso male qui, Ragazzi, sono arrivato a Orange. È stata un'avventura. Però è stato figo. Okay, actually I was in the wrong village. Maps first took me to Bois d'Ange, a much smaller but very similar village with a large square. I took a little walk here and then finally Orange. It was a really hot day and I was crazy thirsty again, but I couldn't find a bar, so I tried to go into a fancy restaurant. The chef looks very amused, but in the end he gave me a bottle of yummy, delicious, cheap and cold water. It seemed like a treasure to me. But back to us. The most curious aspect of Orange is the orange or the golden, as you prefer. Everything in those villages was built with a special limestone very rich of iron oxide, which gives the houses this golden look. I felt like I was at home. This town reminded me a little of the villages of Monferrato or Langhe, even if with strange colors and particular people. It was like an alternative reality, like the hills beyond the mirror. That's so cool. Eccoci qua guys, sono di nuovo in macchina perché voglio farvi vedere ancora una cosa. Devo dire che andare per paesini comunque è sempre un'ottima idea, questo posto era veramente figo e comunque fa un caldo che c'è da crepare, veramente. And now, my dear lost friends, it's castle time. Let's go to the Château de Gerniaux. Ok, siamo arrivati e adesso andiamo in cerca dello Château. Dove sarà lo Château? Dove sei, Château? Ti troverò ovunque tu sia. I have no idea why I choose Gerniaux among the many castles in the area. Perhaps for golden stones? Probably it was a chance that guided me to this place, so as soon as I arrived I took a lot of shots everywhere outside, and then I badly joined the guided tour. Yes, it was in French, they were only French people and I felt like one of them. They were very friendly, especially the guide, who was really good at explaining, and his gesticulation helped me a lot to understand. I hardly understood something, actually. Surely that Louis XIII had a very nice goatee. So, here's the castle, my friends. The castle of Gerniaux was built in the 13th century by the Glettin family, was later donated to the Lord of Bayeux. With its rounded towers, its drawbridge and its golden stones, this old building surrounded by hills stole my heart. My mind was drifting away, and for a moment I imagined the first commander of the guard, wearing old gold armor decorated with squiggles, entering on horseback, like in one of my beloved fantasy books. I was happy, and still I am, because I didn't miss the last tour and now I can share this experience with you. But after breathing the fresh air of the hills from up there, I reached my spaceship and then, after a while, my hotel. E buongiorno a tutti guys, ultimo giorno di viaggio. Stamattina mi sono svegliato prestissimo perché c'erano tipo i fulmini, i tuoni, i lampi. Adesso sono rimaste un po' di nuvole. Comunque noi partiamo e l'ultima tappa di questo viaggio ci porterà a Chambéry. Quindi andiamo guys. On my way back I had a lot of time, so I decided to plan a very quick stop in one of the most important cities in the French area of Rhône-Alpes. I'm talking about Chambéry, prefecture of the Savoy department and in past time historical capital of the Savoy region since the 13th century. So after quick refueling and a half-hour drive, I reached the city. If I have to find the right adjective to describe Chambéry, I think it would have to be medieval, especially speaking of its alley with flags and touches of wood, not to mention the large squares of the center such as Place Saint-Léger, where I couldn't stop imagining a gathering of thousands of the king's knights, and Place Métropole with this beautiful Cathedral Saint-François de Sales. I sneaked into the streets like a grey fox thief, with the aim of stealing some shots of people and the environment around me. The flavor of the dark cages was all around me, even the weather was affected by it. Raga, non è notte, è venuto buio perché sta per scatenarsi il temporale dell'esistenza. quindi io raga adesso vado a cercare un posto per intabarrarmi e mi sa che metto via anche la Fuji perché un disastro, oddio, ho un attimo un problemino. The expression bad weather doesn't give the idea of that terrible situation. It was badly raining a lot and I didn't have so much time, also because I didn't know how long it would last. So I took all my courage and faced the storm. And for a while it went good. Yes, the first 2 minutes. Then, knowing that it was raining too much, I hid in the Cathedral of Saint François de Sales, where there was no type of lighting to make any type of film. I was lost in the dark and in the water. I was losing all my hopes, so I focused my mind and I started thinking hard about a huge elephant, and voila! The unstoppable flow has dried up. It was real magic. By the way, the elephant I just told you about was built in honor of a Savoyard general called Benoit de Bogne, who led and won a war campaign in India against the Maratha Empire. But there was one last thing I have to visit in Chambéry. Ok guys, ha smesso un pochettino, quindi va un po' meglio, però sta ancora piovendo. Adesso sto andando verso il castello e niente, speriamo che non riprenda come prima, ma penso sia stata proprio una ramata d'acqua secca e spero che smetta del tutto, così posso ricominciare a fare video anche con la Fuji, anche se insomma anche con questa. After having well explored the squares of the center, you could not miss a visit to the famous Chambéry castle, and so here I am. It was built in the Middle Ages by the lords of Chambéry, then passed to the Savoy, and in the 16th century it became the capital of the Savoy state. If you didn't know, the Savoys were the family of kings of Italy, now no longer because Italy is a republic. By the way, in 1860, on the basis of Treaty of Turin, Savoy state and its beautiful manor were annexed to France. This castle is really beautiful and is the real reason why I came to this small town. Living now in Turin, I notice many similarities with the famous buildings of the city where I live. The visit was worth it, but now it was time to come back. Raga, è venuta l'ora di tornare. Ahimè. And here we are, again on the way back, darting on the Savoy motorway, ready to go home, and while I was driving listening to my favorite podcast, I started thinking to this amazing experience. Actually, this was a journey that gave me more than I expected. I met many kind and funny people, discovered hidden and interesting villages. I was swept away by a tsunami, but it wasn't over. This was a journey in myself, a big part of the growth path I took last year. It was the first time where, after making peace with some of my inner troubles in Bologna, I started to turn my full attention outward. I was just me, ready to go, the freedom of the moment, my creativity and some new friends met by chance along my way. This is the meaning of the journey for me, living every moment, changing perspective, savoring the flavor of every place, feeling the vibes, observing the details, letting myself be overwhelmed by every sensation and every encounter. Yes, the moment, where sometimes I forgot to live. Thinking about the past, fearing the future, I don't know. Being aware that life does not have a higher aim, but that you decide the purpose you give it, makes me understand how much meaning these little forgotten nuances of travel have. And I think this looking outward is the starting path to really discover day after day who I want to be.